how we create healthcare work environments which enable staff to thrive, at the same time deliver high quality, compassionate care for patients and communities and the people of our countries. In particular, over the course of the last 10 years, that work has focused on the importance of compassionate leadership for creating the kind of cultures that enable people to thrive, to feel a sense of belonging, to feel a sense of effectiveness, to feel a sense of control in their work lives. And that work has thankfully had a huge influence on policies and practices in healthcare sectors in a number of countries around the world. And my formal role is as a senior visiting fellow in the King's Fund in London, which is a charity and think tank focused on healthcare. And I'm Professor of Organizational Psychology at Lancaster University. And it's a joy to be with you, Vidyamala.
Thank you, Michael. And hello, everybody. Really wonderful to be with you again. I can see there's quite a number of people that were here yesterday, so welcome back. And for those of you who are here for just this workshop, a warm welcome to you. And yeah, it's an absolute privilege to be here with Michael. Our paths have crossed in various ways over the years, and latterly we're both members of the Health Impact Cluster of the Global Compassion Coalition, which is a really wonderful initiative. People who've got quite influential roles in healthcare trying to come together, seeing what we can do for the world to make healthcare more compassionate, both for the people who provide healthcare and for those that receive healthcare. And of course, even those that provide healthcare will receive healthcare at one time or another, because we're all humans with bodies that will need attention from time to time. My background is that I injured my spine when I was 16, which was in 1976, and I learned to meditate when I was 25 in 1985. When I was in hospital, I was introduced to meditation and intuited more than understood. I just had this intuition, maybe a little bit like Michael. I knew this is what I need to pursue. And I guess what I was intuiting more than anything is the power of the mind. And I don't mean sort of mind over matter in some kind of simplistic way, but more that that all human experience is mediated through awareness. All human experience is mediated through the mind. And I knew intuitively I could have some kind of agency in terms of how I manage this body that has been it's been a difficult body to live in for all these years. I've had multiple surgeries and got a paralyzed bowel and bladder, and my legs don't work properly. And, you know, it's been a lot, but I have found these approaches utterly transformative. And, you know, generally I have a good life these days. And I founded a charity called Breathworks 23 years ago, which is completely dedicated to offering mindfulness and compassion to people who live with pain, chronic illness, or any kind of illness, and any kind of stress. So that's been my life's work in a way. I really loved it. I'm also an ordained Buddhist, so I have my own spiritual life running alongside this work that I do. And of course, they're not so separate, really. It's all part of the wish to have as good a life as possible for myself and give other people the tools to have as good a life as possible for themselves, and to ultimately realize that we're deeply, deeply interconnected. There's a great web happening all the time that we're participating in. Yeah, so I'm here to support Michael today in this particular workshop. You know, he's got this incredible wealth of knowledge about the workplace and organizational leadership and so on. And I've been leading an international charity for the past 2 decades. So of course, I've got a lot of experience with the workplace through that. And we have been trying to make Breathworks a compassionate, mindful workplace where people want to come to work and they love their work. And I'm pleased to say that that's been the feedback that we've had pretty consistently, which is very, very important to me.
Thank you, Vidyamala. It's a privilege to share this time with you. The experience of work is hugely important to us all. You know, when we look at the international research, it shows that for most people, the experience of work is about the worst experience they have, second only to being ill in bed. And that's just a tragedy when you think how much time, how much of our precious, mysterious lives we spend at work. And when in a one big experience sample study I saw recently, where you ask people during the course of the day, what are you doing at this minute? How are you feeling? The worst experience for the majority of people was meeting with their supervisors. And that's just tragic that so many people should have such negative experiences of work, because we know it doesn't have to be this way. So our focus today is on how we can surf rather than sink at work. Vidyamala has talked about the flexibility and the softness of surfing, the give, the dynamism of it, and it's that notion of how we weave and bend and dance through our work experience, so it's positive. So I'm just going to briefly show you what the aims of the time we have together are as we crafted them. They may change as we talk during the course of today, and also what the major kind of areas that we plan to talk through together with you. And then we'll talk about the participation guidelines for this session. So I'm going to show you some slides, and hopefully Vidyamala will give me a thumbs up and tell me that you can see the slides.
It's perfect.
Yeah? Okay,
yeah, perfect.
Good. So that's the title of our session, and the aims are to reinforce the importance of compassion and self-compassion to aid us in surfing rather than sinking in work, to understand what we've discovered over many decades are the workplace characteristics that enable us to thrive at work rather than for it just to be an awful drudge. Of course, there will be times when it's difficult and pressured, but for the most part, it needn't be that way. And we'll talk about some practical tools and supports that we hope will help you in your work environments. And hopefully we'll have some time to discuss together during the times when we share questions and challenges, how we might deal with those. So the key areas that we will explore today, given time and space, it's looking after myself with compassion, a little bit about the scientific research on compassion, which is just truly extraordinary and reinforces the centrality of compassion in human behavior. We'll talk about what compassionate leadership and work organization cultures, what that means, what it looks like, and to recognize that compassion in work is not just some soft cushion scented candles approach. It's about having courage and wisdom to deal with difficulty and conflicts and difficult behaviors. And we'll talk about what our core human needs are in the workplace and why fulfilling those, meeting those, is so central to our ability to serve, thrive, experience joy in the workplace, and how we can maybe begin to address the question of how we ensure those needs are met. And we'll talk about the importance of working in teams, because that's the way we human beings have worked for hundreds of thousands of years, and how we create psychologically safe environments, basically where people feel safe to speak up without fear of ridicule or negative judgment or aggression. And we'll finish with what I think is the most important topic of all, which is self-compassion that we bring to the workplace. So that's, if you like, the map of our time together today, and be useful just to talk a little bit about some guidelines for how we participate. Vidyamala, would you like to talk through the guidelines, or would you like me to do that?
I can do that if you like.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Just on my bit of paper, here we are. Good. So just wait for Michael to turn off the slides. Yeah. Good. Yeah, so here we all are. There's 33 of us now from many, many different countries. And it's a 3-hour workshop. So, you know, that's a substantial period. And people have heard me speaking before will have heard me say we have not had millions of years of evolution to sit slumped in front of a computer. It's very unnatural, this whole thing of being stuck in one position and staring at a screen. So we really invite you to move. Please move around during the session. And if I'm on gallery, I sometimes go on gallery view just so I can get a sense of the group and connect with people. And I love it when I see people wandering about or standing up or lying down or whatever, because it makes me think, oh, good, people are really sort of owning what they need. And that's an aspect of self-compassion. You know, what do you need for your body and your mind in order to stay engaged with the workshop? Because as we've seen, there's going to be some amazing areas that Michael goes into. So please feel free to move around. If you just want to turn away from the screen at any point, please do that. You can still hear. You know, this, if you notice you're getting sort of sucked in and your chin's going up, that's time to draw back, maybe turn away. Resting back is good. And there's a 50-50 principle, which I've recently heard about, where we have 50% of our awareness in ourselves and 50% of our awareness with Michael or myself or whatever's happening through the workshop. So that's a really lovely mindfulness practice. You know, just how can you hold that balance of 50-50? Resting back in the chair is good. It's also very lovely, I think, to embark on this time together as human beings. I'm just a human being. Michael's a human being. You're all human beings. And leave aside your kind of professional identity, because we're aware that there probably are some people here today who are leaders and so on in your workplace, and you're wanting to learn new skills, which is brilliant. But if you've got that kind of professional hat on, you know, making lots of notes and trying to remember everything, that's a particular kind of way of showing up. If you just show up as a human, I'm here with there's now 35 of us, other 35 lovely human beings from all over the world. And I will most probably retain more if I'm just here as a human rather than as an identity or a role. We'd invite that. And I know there's going to be other people here who haven't got a sort of high-powered job in leadership. So it's just nice if we can just be together and let go of our sort of views and roles and so on. So I think that's probably the main things I wanted to say. Yeah. Sometimes I say when I'm leading a workshop, you could imagine there's a little coat rack outside the door and you hang up the coat of your professional identity. Just leave it outside the room. And here we are just as humans, because compassion is, as you'll be hearing, it's an innate human quality. And
thank you, Vidyamala. So let's begin by talking about looking after myself with compassion before we begin to focus on the aspects of the workplace that we need to sculpt in order to surf, not sink. I've been really powerfully persuaded by some of the research done by Professor Sabine Sonnentag at the University of Mannheim, who is a wonderful human being and a fantastic researcher. And I want to show you some of the findings that have come from her research over the last 25 years or so on how we recover from stressful work. Again, Vidyamala, can you just tell me if you can see that okay?
can't see anything yet.
Okay, let me just make sure I am setting this up okay. I'm being human here.
Good.
How's that?
Totally perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so what we know, many people's work is stressful, it feels overwhelming, and we need to recover, from tough work days. And what research work around the world tells us are that activities that help us recover are those that enable us to detach from work. So, for example, watching a TV series, having dinner with friends, anything that enables us to detach from work rather than still processing it. Activities that enable us to relax help us to recover. So practicing, we've talked about meditation, maybe sitting, listening to gentle music, activities that give us a sense of achievement are really important for recovery. So, we often think that recovering is just about kind of lying on the couch and taking it easy, but we know that activities that challenge us help us to recover. So it could be something like cooking a meal that you've not cooked before. I've been cooking a meal today for my partner who's been away in London and is coming back this evening, and I cooked a new meal which I hadn't done before. Very challenging. I hope it's okay. Or it could be something like learning another language. But challenging tasks help us recover. And also outside work, having choice or some sense of control over what we do. So not just, when we finish work at the end of the day, another long list of tasks to get through, but having choice so we have control. We've also talked, Vidyamala's talked about the importance of having proper breaks when we're doing something like this on Zoom. And we know that having proper work breaks, taking a proper lunch break, for example, is really important for recovery. I mean, in the area that I do a lot of work in, healthcare, we know that when doctors take proper lunch breaks, then patient care is safer. There are fewer errors that harm patients. Of course, vacations, holidays really help us to recover, though the effects usually fade in a week or two. And of course, everyone knows the importance of exercise as a way of recovering. The research that's really grown in terms of our understanding over the last few years has been research on how spending time in nature helps us to recover. And what we see is that there's a kind of hierarchy of effects, with blue spaces being the most powerful for our recovery. So spending time by the sea, by lakes, by rivers, is hugely powerful for recovery. This is a picture of a reservoir about 4 miles from my house in Yorkshire in England that I cycled around yesterday, actually. And then come green environments, so the woods, the hills, the forests. And then closely following that are urban green environments in, city parks or whatever. We recover. But even being outside at all helps our recovery. Just being outside of buildings helps our recovery from stressful work. And there's some research that shows that the more architectural variety, the better as well. I think one of the most extraordinary findings from all of this international research on recovery is that the more biodiverse a space we're in, the more we recover. So the more birds, trees, flowers, insects, animals, butterflies around us in a space, the more we recover. It's a kind of beautiful, mysterious finding. And we also know that those who most need to engage in these activities are least likely to do so. So it's really important to kind of reflect on what these findings tell us and what we can do for ourselves in terms of self-compassion to ensure that we're recovering. And we know a lot as well about the factors that enable human well-being. And I think that the 6 that kind of emerge as most important are, well, by far the most important is the first. Spending time with people we love and who love us is the most important factor in our well-being. Helping other people is hugely important. Compassion, and we'll talk more about that. Continuing to learn and grow through our lives. We are learning organisms. I've just been having a conversation this afternoon with my 7-month-old grandson, who is just learning at such a rapid pace. He's just learned to wave like this now. And that capacity for learning goes on through our lives. Being present, being here and now, rather than ruminating about the past all the time, or being anxious about the future. Being able to be present in the here and now is really important for our well-being. talked about exercise, getting enough sleep. We know that the function of sleep is repair and maintenance of our bodies and brains. And virtually all of us need about 8 hours of sleep a night. And that 8th hour is particularly important for some repair and maintenance functions. But we see in many countries that the average being taken is around 7 hours. Some people have much less. And you can't cheat nature. There are health consequences of not having enough sleep, and it has effects on our cognitive performance as well. So that's just a brief introduction to thinking about how I look after myself and what maybe I could do better. And I want to ask you just to reflect on what I've said. I'll just go back to the first slide and just reflect for a minute on, are there things you can do more of that you're currently not doing that would be helpful for your recovery? And if you're happy to do so, just share in the chat maybe something for you that would be helpful for your recovery from work, for your well-being. Anything in that list or in this list that you feel, yeah, my self-compassion could be put into practice better by doing more of this. And if you're willing to do so, just put something in the chat.
Thanks so much, Mike. And if I could just jump in with another practical thing, which is, as you will all have seen, this is recorded, this webinar. And if you don't want to be on the recording, you can turn your camera off. And if you write in the chat box, we won't read your name out. We'll just say somebody has said these different things, so you can be assured of anonymity if that's what you prefer. So we've got someone saying have some fun. Someone saying reaching out to friends and neighbors more often. That's interesting. Yeah, that connection. Someone else spending more time outside. And then someone else, good sleep. Yeah, and then someone saying not doing something else when I take my lunch. Yes, I think many of us multitask at lunchtime. And then do yoga and meditation more often. I should take care of a proper sleep routine. Yeah, very good. And then someone else detaching from work and putting the phone away. That's a remarkably difficult thing to do, isn't it? But fantastic. And then someone else is saying having a proper break and going outside for some of it. That's very good. And even if you can't get outside, you could choose to look out the window. As Michael was saying, there's the blue and the green. And if you look out the window, there may be a blue sky, there may be some trees you can look at, and that will have these biological effects. Detachment from work, smile and laugh. That's lovely. And then someone else, I need to build learning into my time. Learning Spanish is top of the list. Yeah, so maybe you could take a kind of intention to action that. And then someone else saying no when I need to. And then
That's lovely, really. Thank you very much for participating in that way and reflecting in that way. I always think our bodies, our mysterious bodies, which are just so incredible. We're only beginning to discover the magic and the mystery of our bodies. They are the instruments through which we experience this amazing, mysterious life. And it's a privilege to be able to use the instruments of our bodies in this way and to have insight into the things that help us, like biodiverse environments. It's so important that therefore that we protect our environments. And in keeping, I think, with what we've just talked about, what I'm going to suggest is we maybe now just take a brief 4 or 5 minutes for a breathing space meditation before we move on to begin to look at compassion in the workplace. Vidyamala, would you be wonderful and lead that for us?
Yes, I'll be very happy to do that. Good. So, yeah, we've been here for half an hour now, and already there's a sense of engagement, of input, and so on. And we could even imagine that this is like a little, we're at work, if we do work, and we're just taking a little pause and we're implementing some of these things we just heard about to resource ourselves. So the first thing we're going to do is simply stop and rest and draw our awareness in. So you can close your eyes if you want to, or lower your gaze. And see if you can allow the weight of the body to be held by the chair, the floor, the bed if you're lying down. So having a quality of settling, resting, and yielding into the support beneath us, letting go of gripping. And right now, in this moment, there's nothing to do and no one to be. So just seeing if we can pause, settle, rest, arrive. Let's see if we can allow our awareness to pour down, to fill the body. Very often it can feel like awareness is located in the head. It can be very helpful to allow awareness to fill the body. So we're resting inside sensation rather than thinking. And feeling inside the movements and sensations of breathing deep in the body. An opening phase on the in-breath, a letting go, yielding phase on the out-breath. Seeing if we can hit the out-breath, go all the way out, and the in-breath flow back in its own time. There's no need to force or strain, but resting inside the natural breath. Now let's broaden our awareness again a little bit, maybe opening to sounds, the environment, other people around us. I've got birds singing where I am, and it's very interesting to allow the sounds to come towards us. So rather than my awareness flying out the window towards the birds, I stay grounded and centered by it, but I let the sounds come to me to receive them. So whatever environment we're in, staying grounded and centered, and then receiving the sounds, the smells that are around us. And the sense of any other people that are around us, just letting them into our awareness, receptivity and openness and connection. And then opening the eyes when you're ready. We're moving the body however we want to. And again, seeing if we can make the movement intentional. I always like to stretch.
Lovely, thank you. I love the idea as well, Vijamala, that this time we have together can be a model of how we create effective workplaces. I was reflecting during the meditation. I remember back in the 1980s, I was leading a workshop with senior executives of an international oil company, BP, British Petroleum. And I decided it was a workshop on creativity and innovation. I decided to lead a meditation practice with them. They were all white males of a certain age. And I remember starting to lead the meditation and feeling a little bit sleepy. And sometime later I woke up and I still have no idea how long I was asleep for, but they were still sat there in a circle very obediently.
Probably thinking, oh, this is so peaceful.
Probably the best thing in their careers. Anyway, yeah. So how do we create workplaces that are going to help people thrive and be well? I think that compassion is at the heart of the kind of cultures we need to create, because compassion is a core emotional regulation system for us humans. Paul Gilbert, who is, I think, the guru of compassion in terms of psychological research, talks about us having three emotional regulation systems. One is a threat system, and of course we need that because we can be threatened. The other is a kind of a goal acquisition system. We want to get the things we need, food, shelter, all the rest of it. And then there's the nurturing system, which is compassion. And, you can, I think, see that over the last 50, 60, 70 years, humanity has been, I think, very overstimulated in terms of threat system, with all of the media and the social media that is just bombarding us with stories of war and cruelty and awful human behaviors. And then we also have this goal acquisition system, which I think has been hugely overstimulated by consumerist cultures of advertising. You need this, you must get that, you must get that. But we've also seen more alienation, people not so connected. People, we see in many countries now declining mental health amongst young people, this sense of not belonging, of alienation. And it's because I think those two emotional regulation systems, threat and goal acquisition, have been so overstimulated. We've neglected this belonging, this compassion. And so I want to say a little bit about what compassion means and why it's so important to us as human beings. And it ultimately relates to our sense of connection, not only with each other, but to everything that around us. So Paul defines compassion as a sensitivity to suffering in self and in others, a sensitivity to suffering in self and others with a commitment to prevent or alleviate it. So it's as much a motivation as it is an emotion. And I think it is really important to recognize that compassion is about our relationship with ourselves. One of the workplaces I've had contact with is a relatively large mental health and learning disability treatment organization, and they've been retraining all of their staff in compassionate leadership for the last 5 years. Now has the lowest levels of staff stress and the highest levels of engagement of any healthcare organization in the country. And at the beginning of the training, they ask their staff, reflect on who you've had the longest, deepest relationship with in your life. So they get them to reflect on that question, and you can reflect on it too. And then they say, of course, well, actually, it's you. And they say to them, how's that relationship going, by the way? How kind is that person? How caring? How compassionate? How much fun is that person? So self-compassion is hugely important, and we'll talk about it more later, but it's a basis for our ability to be compassionate to others. And compassion is about this motivation to help. So it has these 4 behavioral components. So if my new friend Maria, who I can see on my screen, is in pain or distress, then for me to be compassionate, I have to do 4 things. I have to attend, understand, empathize, and help. And attending means being present with you, Maria, in the here and now, being present with you, letting go of thoughts about, oh, how can I be compassionate towards Maria? It's letting go of and relaxing back into this moment, effortless presence. A bit as Vidyamala described in that breathing space meditation of no need to try, no need to be something, you just let go and be present. And it's a gift. It's a gift to me to be present with you. And it creates the conditions where I can attend in another way. And Nancy Klein, wonderful teacher, talks about listening with fascination. So attending is being present and listening with fascination. And that provides the platform, the powerful platform for the second element of compassion, which is my understanding the causes of your pain or distress through us having a dialogue together. And that provides, that creates the context, that creates the conditions for me to empathize with you, to feel your pain or distress, but still having the presence not to turn it into my drama. And then that creates the conditions, or it creates the motivation for me to want to help or alleviate your pain or suffering in some way. And there's a fundamental distinction between empathy alone and compassion with that additional intention to help element. So when we ask, neuroscience studies over the last 20 years show us when we asked people to be empathic to someone in pain or distress, that's associated with the activation of various pain centers in our brain because we mirror the other person's pain. But when we ask people to be compassionate, that's associated with the activation of the reward center in the brain because we've been hardwired by evolution to be compassionate to each other when we're in pain or distress. It's for 99% of us, it's a natural human reaction. So we see somebody fall or hurt in the street, we rush to help. Multiple people rush in to help because compassion is what's enabled us to, over the hundreds of thousands of years, to form social groups, communities, tribes, family, kinship groups. Compassion is about blurring the boundaries between self and other. It establishes a feeling of trust and connection and belonging between us. And belonging is fundamental to human behavior. You're as likely to die from loneliness as you are from smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And we know a lot more now about the impact of compassion in human health generally. And again, I just want to show you quickly a few slides to illustrate this. And please bear with me while I be a human. Can you see that, Vidyamala?
Yes.
Great,
We're on
thanks.
the wrong slide at the moment.
Yeah, so
Beautiful.
here are some just very quick bullet points. There are thousands of studies looking at the impact of compassion in human health. The first is what's called a randomized controlled trial, a study of anesthetists visiting patients prior to surgery, where in one half of the study, they visit patients and provide a sedative, normal visit. The other half, they visit patients, they don't provide sedatives, but they're briefed to be extra compassionate in how they behave. And that compassion is associated with patients having a much lower requirement for painkillers after their surgery. And they also have a much shorter length of hospital stay, which is really important for recovery. And the second is a study of patients with an early diagnosis of lung cancer. Half of them were assigned to receive normal early cancer care, the other half to receive, in addition, early palliative care. So if you like, early on, an extra dose of compassion. And what was a surprising finding from that research was those patients lived much longer. Unexpected finding. It was a study of quality of life, and it showed that those patients with the extra compassionate care had better quality of life, but also lived significantly longer. And we see similar large effects of compassion in the treatment of long-term disorders like diabetes and HIV, and of therapist compassion in the treatment of mental health problems. But I find what's extraordinary and amazing, and it's consistent with what I was saying about the neuroscience studies earlier, that when you are compassionate to others, when I'm speaking with Maria and I'm present with you, Maria, and I'm attending and wanting to help, that benefits me as well as you. So we see in studies of family doctors and nurses who are asked to be extra compassionate in their interactions with patients over a 2-week period, that has a significant impact on their own mental health, with lower levels at the end of the 2-week period, lower levels of anxiety, stress, and depression. So it's really important to understand that compassion benefits the person who is receiving compassion, but also the person who is being compassionate. And of course, there are huge cost savings associated with compassion in the context of healthcare. It is simply, compassion is the most important intervention there is in healthcare. And it's fundamental to human life and human behavior and human societies. That's why the work of the Global Compassion Coalition to create much more compassionate societies all around the globe, I feel, is so important. But what of work organizations? The challenge for us, I think, then is, given this, how do we create work organizations that have compassionate cultures where people behave compassionately to each other? How do we create the conditions where those in our work organizations are compassionate towards those they provide services for, let's say in a retail organization, or where they're compassionate to each other and where they're self-compassionate? And the answer to that question is, well, it's about the culture of the organization. How do we shape the culture of our work organizations? Well, every interaction that every one of us has every day at work is an opportunity to shape the culture through how warm, irritable, cynical, aggressive, compassionate we are. We know that the emotional and behavioral ripples radiate out. We pick up behaviors from each other and radiate them out. So if we want to create compassionate cultures in our work organizations, then all of us are responsible for that. But from the last 100 years of research around the world on organizations, we know that the most significant influence on the culture of an organization is leaders, because what leaders pay attention to and focus on and talk about and model in their behavior tells us what is important to them, and therefore what we should value. So, leaders who, I visit organizations where people talk about the most important asset we have is our staff. We're determined to be an ethical organization, but then you look at what leaders are focused on, what they talk about, how they behave, and all they're talking about is profitability, or all they're talking about is holding people to account and performance management. So there's a mismatch between the values, the rhetoric of the values, and what they're doing in practice. And I see this in healthcare organizations as well. So if we want to create compassionate cultures, then leaders must embody compassion in their leadership. And in practice, what that means is those 4 behaviors: leaders who have the courage to be present with those they lead and to listen with fascination, and leaders who have, I'll give you some examples from the work I do in healthcare organizations. So it's leaders having the courage to be present with staff in the accident and emergency room or in the ward, rather than being hidden away in meetings or on some, seventh floor office suite. It's leaders having the courage to seek to understand the challenges that the staff face. And that means hearing things we don't want to hear. We don't have enough midwives in this maternity unit to provide safe care for women and their families. Leaders who have the courage to empathize with those they lead, to feel what it's like to be a nurse on your third 13-hour night shift in a row, where you haven't had time to take a rest break, where you're run off your feet and you're so exhausted you're afraid to drive home. And leaders who have the courage then to help staff. And in the context of leadership, helping means helping those we lead to do their jobs more effectively by helping to remove the obstacles that get in the way and by helping to ensure they have the resources they need. And, this is not some new model of leadership. We've known for 70 years, I'd say, that these 4 behaviors are critical to effective leadership in organizations, that the most important skill of a leader is listening to those that they lead. And the most important task of a leader in a work organization is helping those we lead to do their jobs more effectively by helping to remove the obstacles that get in the way and helping to ensure they've got the resources they need, the right numbers of staff, the right training, the right equipment, and so on. And it's no coincidence that the same 4 behaviors that make up effective leadership are the same 4 behaviors that make up compassion, because they're the basic human behaviors that enable us to feel a sense of trust and belonging and connection with each other. And, from all of the international research, we know that, the more people who report their leaders who behave in this way in an organization, the higher our levels of staff engagement. In private sector organizations, that's associated with more profitability, more productivity, better customer service, better staff retention. In the healthcare sector where I work, we see that the more staff in a healthcare organization who report their leaders behave in these ways, that has a significant impact on care quality, patient satisfaction, the retention of staff, patient safety, financial performance, and patient mortality. So creating compassionate cultures through compassionate leadership and our own individual compassion is critical to creating the kind of workplaces where people are more likely to surf rather than sink. So let me pause there and give us an opportunity to reflect. What I'm going to suggest is that we have a little breakout session together and a breakout discussion to reflect on the question, how compassionate is my workplace and how can I make a difference? And I'm going to ask if you would share thoughts that you're comfortable sharing in your breakout group. I think there'll be around 5 people in each breakout group, and Alex, I think, is on hand to wave this magic Harry Potter wand to make that happen. But before we go into the breakout groups, I'd just like to ask if you would put into practice how we work in breakout groups, to put into practice what we've said about compassion. So it's just relaxing back into being present with each other, listening to each other with fascination, really seeking to understand what the other person is saying, empathizing with them, caring with them, and then just thinking through the question, oh, I wonder what I can offer that might help. Compassion's not necessarily about having solutions and jumping to solutions. It's having that intent to want to help. So if we use those as a kind of guideline for the breakout group discussions. But before we do that, let me just check if there are any questions. You can see the question, how compassionate is my workplace and how can I make a difference? But before we go into the breakouts, any questions you want to ask first, or is everyone clear?
I've just got a little bit of a question, Michael.
Yeah.
I'm aware there might be some people here who aren't in a workplace at the moment. So how would you suggest they engage with the question?
Well, to think about a workplace you have been in the past and how that was for you. Yeah.
Good, good, good.
Thanks, Vidyamala. Okay, well, Alex, if you have your magic wand with you, if you could put us into breakout groups, that would be wonderful. And we'll take about 10 minutes for this.
Good. Most people have gone into a group.
Yeah, looks like Vindra and Nicole and Uli maybe haven't.
It's amazing, that picture on Uli's. It's a flower, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Really
It-
wonderful,
pa-
Michael.
Passion flower.
It's a passion flower, is it?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Good.
It's
Yeah,
lovely,
wonderful to just bask in
lovely,
what expertise.
lovely working with you on this together.
Yeah.
It makes it a real delight.
Yeah. Yeah. And those four steps are so accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you come up with that list yourself, or is it something you got from somewhere else?
Yeah, well, I came across a special issue of the Academy of Management Review, which is a very nerdy, I mean, it's the top theoretical journal in the world back in 2011. And they had a list of behaviors in there that I felt were a bit overcomplicated. So I synthesized them down to these 4 behaviors. So it's based on others' work, but it's kind of trying to make it more accessible.
Good. I think it's very accessible. Yeah, very, very good. And you can apply it to yourself, you can apply it to the breakout rooms, you can apply it to your work.
Mm.
And then, you've seen that with compassionate leaders. Yeah, very, very good. Very, very good indeed.
And you had a wonderful party last night. I'm really pleased.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, it was
great.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I came in and it was all on the table waiting for me, which was nice. And they were fine about waiting
Mm.
late. Yeah. And I think the kids ate. It meant that they could feed the kids earlier. So that was good.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it is a tension for us. I did a meditation for the International Compassion Community on Christmas Eve, and my daughter was really unhappy that I was rushing off during the dinner
mm,
to do this. And yeah, uh, in retrospect, probably not a good choice on my part. But
yeah.
yeah,
So it is like someone said to me today, why are you working on a Sunday?
mm,
And I said, well, I'm doing it because I really enjoy it. And it's
mm,
an offering to the Global Compassion Coalition, which I really believe in.
yeah, yeah.
So this doesn't really feel like work, to be honest. It feels like play. And I love learning. I feel I'm learning from you, which is a really great thing.
Mm. We're learning together. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. So I might just go off and move my body for a few
Yeah,
minutes.
do. We're right on time.
I know, I'm very
Amazing.
impressed with your timekeeping.
Amazing.
Very good.
Not normally like this.
No, it's a lot better than mine, but I kind of know that I always kind of know, well, I'll figure it out at the end. You just have to flex around it, don't you? But this is very,
You have to surf.
very
Yeah.
exemplary.
Mm.
Good. So I'll see you in a few minutes.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think everybody's back. Welcome back to together in this work community that we've created. And thank you for participating in the breakout groups. And it would be, I think, really helpful to hear any reflections that you have or to hear about any themes that came up. So if you feel comfortable, then please raise your hand and speak directly, or if you'd rather, then also just please put comments in the chat, which we can read out and won't be attributed. So any reflections, thoughts, any themes that emerged in your conversation? Margaret, your hand is raised. Alex, if you can unmute Margaret's microphone. Or maybe Margaret can unmute her own microphone. I'm not sure if that's what the problem is. Anybody else with a comment or reflection or thought about that question? Catherine?
Thank you. Yes, so it was mentioned it's one thing for leaders to say the right things, and very often they don't actually do it, as you had described. And I think this applies to other areas as well, like inclusion and diversity in organizations, that people know what they ought to say and they will send out the official policy. But to actually make it part of the culture seems very difficult. Maybe it takes a lot of time. And I'm wondering if you're going to speak about that in the workshop.
My perception, Catherine, is this is an increasing problem as organizations become more self-conscious about the image that they project. And so there's a lot of work that goes on creating visions or statements about sets of values. But the translation of those into practice is what matters, because culture is about behavior rather than about words on a website. And certainly in healthcare organizations, what we're now trying to do is to ensure that leaders are trained from the very beginning of their careers in the skills of compassionate leadership, and also that we don't just assume that that is going to be sufficient. And by the way, that also applies to the skills of being an inclusive leader. So we, in the biggest annual national longest running staff survey in the world that we have in England, in the NHS, we now have a measure of compassionate leadership. And so every organization and every large department in our healthcare organizations gets annual feedback on the extent to which leaders are behaving in compassionate and inclusive ways. Not as a stick to beat people with, but to enable us then to provide supports for leaders so that they can develop their abilities to be compassionate, to be inclusive in their leadership. And I think that really the challenge for organizations is to move from that tick box rhetoric exercise that you describe into the hard task of making this happen in practice. And I think it applies particularly to issues of diversity and inclusion, where, we tick lots of boxes in terms of having policies and procedures, but we need to ensure that that's being translated into clear goals that people are achieving at every level, every individual leader, every team, every department, the organization as a whole. So thank you, Catherine. That's really helpful. Margaret, are you?
Yes, I kept trying to unmute, but it's unmuted now.
Great.
What came to my mind, the very word compassionate in organizations, I think could people feel it was a bit soft, a bit weak.
Mm.
The actual word. You have to be compassionate. That looks like a weakness sometimes, not a strength.
Mm.
Just came to my mind because you can teach, you can talk the talk, you can't always walk the talk. It was just a little thought. I thought, oh, maybe sometimes the word is, if they're big organizations and they're into profit and things, to say be compassionate.
Mm.
I don't know. It was just popped into my head. It's a.
I think it's a really helpful comment, because it's what many people think, that
Weak.
compassion is, as I said earlier, maybe can be seen as kind of soft cushions and scented candles approach to leadership. But in fact, and we'll come on to talk about this in a moment, I think compassionate leadership requires much more courage and authenticity than top-down command and control leadership, which can just be very easy. You tell people what to do and then you don't have to worry about it. Whereas compassionate leadership is about being authentic and listening deeply and hearing things you don't want necessarily to hear. So we'll talk in a moment about how compassion requires courage. And for me, one of a story that helped me understand this was, I was in an organization last year, and there was a man there speaking, and he leads rescue teams internationally when there are disasters. And he was telling me how they'd heard the news of the earthquakes in Syria and Turkey on the radio, on the TV. And within 24 hours, without any administrative or political support, his team was tunneling under collapsed buildings in Turkey to rescue people who were trapped under their incredibly dangerous work. And, you know, that's one illustration of the courage of compassion.
Could I just add one more thing? There
Please.
was a public meeting once, and I have a Tibetan Buddhist teacher. And somebody in the question and answer said, I like my anger. And the answer to that was, from this Tibetan, what you call anger, we sometimes call compassion. And I thought this probably is that raw energy coming up. If you put it to positive, like getting some justice or something, but I like that. What you call anger, we sometimes call compassion. It's how you direct it. You need a lot of courage to be compassionate.
I think that's really helpful, Margaret. The social justice, compassion is about social justice. And, you know, we see lots of social injustice, and challenging that social injustice, you know, it could be seen as anger, as you say, but I think more appropriately, it's seen as compassion.
Yes, if it's positive, but if you direct it negative, it's more like anger.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite neat.
One of the, I think, really welcome and inspiring activities that the Global Compassion Coalition is involved in is a project to develop compassion in politics. And that's an example of, if you like, the courage of facing probably one of the most difficult areas in human society in terms of social injustice and poor behaviors. So
I'll just read a couple of the comments out in the chat box quickly.
Yeah,
good. So someone's saying, from the examples in our group, it was clear that when leaders embody compassion, it makes a difference. It does make a difference, so that's an agreement there. Though the reactions of others can be variable. Staff also need to be practicing self-compassion. I shared I have worked in a healthcare organisation where there was a mismatch in what values were said to be and what was acted out by leaders. And there was a culture that lacked safety and trust. So I think you've already touched on that, about needing to walk the talk, not just talk the talk. And then someone just very honestly saying, changing the embedded culture in the workplace when the staff find trust and psychological safety difficult is not easy.
So let me just comment on that in particular. If you try to change the culture in your workplace by yourself, there is a real danger that you will be chewed up and spat out by the organization. So one of the things that I think it's really important to say to those of us seeking to create more compassionate, supportive workplaces is, please don't try to do this on your own. Actually, it's about taking collective action. As Margaret Mead said, you know, it's the actions of a small group that change the world. And I read Rebecca Solnit's book last year, Hope in the Dark, and the central thesis of Rebecca Solnit's book, she's an American philosopher, feminist, and her central thesis is that we derive hope from taking collective action, even against the most difficult odds. So I think what's important is that when we're trying to change our workplaces, you know, there is something I can always do. I can be present, seek to understand, empathize, and seek to help. That's something that's within my control, and those behaviors radiate out, and that's really powerful. But if we want to change the culture, if we want to change the leadership, the dominant values, that's best done by a group of people. So find like-minded colleagues who have a shared vision of the kind of workplace that that you and they want, and shape 4 or 5 messages that you want to get across about the kind of workplace we need, and then collectively find ways of repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating those messages. And that's a kind of social movement way of how we can bring about change in organizations. So that's a really helpful comment there in the chat. Well, they're all really, really helpful. Thank you. And
it's just one more. It was really interesting and heart-opening to share with and hear others' experiences and observations. What arose in the group is that sometimes the most compassionate thing to do for oneself is to leave one's place of work.
Yeah.
The sense of urgency and immediacy in some workplaces which provide caring services can make it challenging to pause, be present, and be compassionate. The 50-50 awareness of ourselves and others, which Vidyamala mentioned, offers a balanced approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about that later, aren't we? That sometimes leaving is definitely an option.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I always think that, you know, when we're faced with a difficult workplace environment, we have 3 choices. We can stay and endure it, which if it's causing us pain and stress is not a good strategy for making the most of this precious, wonderful, miraculous life. Or we can seek to change it, ideally collectively. Or if we can make the decision to leave. And there's an example in the chat of a team. It says, a team I worked in tried and kept trying to do so in a compassionate way, and the brick walls were too strong. And what we all ended up doing was choosing to leave. And I think that's a wisdom. That's a wisdom. You know, what I see in healthcare organizations currently is people are under such stress, under such pressure with inadequate resources, and more of them are choosing to leave out of a recognition that, you know, what I hear healthcare staff saying is, I'm exhausted and I'm just tired of being exhausted, so I'm leaving. And that's a rational, wise, self-compassionate decision. So somebody would like to speak. I think it's Leah. Leah, yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Well, Pablo was a kind person I have to meet briefly. I think he asked me if I could comment. I'm not sure exactly, but what my comment was, well, my professional activity, I have a kind of a leadership and in respect with a it's a huge. So I was hospitalized recently for about 20 days, and I'm still at home like it. But one of the things is, as you know, it's different than when you are a patient, and if you're a doctor and a patient, you see things very differently, much more differently. So I thought things that I could do to understand better, not only for me, for other ones, is to, well, what can I do? Then, well, I spent one night in one of the beds, one of the boxes of the ICU to see how noisy that is. So we can really cheer people on movements in order to come down. The other is how to do with something that gives you oxygen. I would placing myself. It's very tough and gives a lot of lack of air. And so it would be important for me because I'm going to use that, and people use that on a patient. You really must do that in a very calm and sensitive way. And lastly, thinking of what you said, Professor Michael, and I thought, well, I should be one night call doing something that the nurses will do, because then I can really see how tough is their job. Maybe I can do something on myself that they will tell me, so not be an observer, but I'm practically seeing that, so that I can implant to improve the quality of the healthcare. So that's I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Leah. Really, that's so helpful. We've talked about those 4 behaviors of attending, understanding, empathizing, and helping. And empathizing, another way of thinking about it, is putting myself in the other person's situation. And you've just given the most wonderful example of how to do that in a courageous and full and complete way, by putting yourself in that situation of the patient, to experience the noise at night, to experience the mask, putting yourself in the situation of the nurse, to experience the pressure they're under. And I think that's a wonderful depiction of empathy in its fullest form. And yeah, it is the role, I think, of compassionate leaders to do just that, rather than be removed and isolated and assuming their understanding from some elevated hierarchical position. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. I'm going to suggest now we take, there are a couple of other comments in the chat about in the teaching profession too, and I see so much stress amongst teachers and in the field of welfare and social care, which have some of the very highest levels of stress amongst people in the public sector. But I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute screen break now, and then come back to talk about a little bit more about courageous and wise compassion. So let's just take a 5-minute screen break and come back at 35 minutes past the hour. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. We were talking about compassion not being simply being nice to people, that compassion is about addressing issues of social justice. It's about confronting difficulties. It's sometimes about being righteously angry in situations. One of the findings from lots of our research has been that people are more engaged in workplaces where there are high levels of appreciation and gratitude, where leaders acknowledge the contributions of people, where they say thank you, where people are appreciative of each other, where they value each other. And it is fascinating that when you look at leaders' beliefs about saying thank you, that they consistently underestimate how powerful their expressions of appreciation and gratitude are on those they lead. Leaders repeatedly and hugely underestimate the power of their expressions of gratitude and appreciation upon those they lead. So I always say to leaders, as long as you do it authentically and thoughtfully, you can do it 10 times more. And when we have an appreciative environment, it makes it much easier to deal with some of the difficulties, I think, that we encounter in workplaces. So I want to talk a little bit, Vidyamala and I are going to talk a little bit about this issue of courageous and wise compassion and what that means. So compassion is about leaning towards suffering and difficulty sometimes. And it can be, for example, dealing with difficult behaviors, maybe discriminatory behaviors in our organizations, people who are aggressive, problems of really poor performance, for example. So having the courage to deal compassionately with that, to have the conversation, to be present, to listen with fascination, to seek to understand, to empathize and to help, but also to be really clear about giving people clear feedback on their behavior. I saw how you behaved towards that patient's relative just now. If you'd spoken to me like that, I would feel really hurt and angry. Having the courage to give really clear feedback. We should be giving lots of appreciation and recognition and thanks and warmth with colleagues, but it's having then also the courage to be really clear about behavior which is damaging, and to deal with conflict early. And I'll say a bit more about that. A lot of disagreements in organizations are the grit in the oyster that creates the pearl of creativity and innovation. So how we deal with conflict is really important, and how we deal with those who lead us. It's managing wisely those who lead us. If they're not behaving with compassion, we need to think about, well, how do we deal with that? As I said, working collectively is far more powerful and effective than working individually. And we'll talk later about courageous self-compassion. But I want to also focus particularly on this issue of dealing with conflict. And here's a little book. It is a thin book. It's not a big, thick tome. One of many, but I think it's a particularly good one by Amy Gallo. It's a Harvard Business Review book called Dealing with Conflict. And she distinguishes in there between conflict about the task and conflict, personal conflict, interpersonal conflict. And we know that chronic interpersonal conflict, if you've got a couple of people in your team who are scratching away at each other, unpleasant to each other continually, it's disastrous for the whole team. It's just pernicious. It's dreadful for the whole team. So part of being courageously compassionate is addressing issues of ongoing interpersonal conflict in our teams. We're all responsible for addressing those sorts of issues rather than tolerating them and hoping it will go away, because it is so damaging. In the context within which I work in healthcare, if you have people in a clinical team who are behaving like that towards each other all of the time, that is as dangerous to patient care as medication errors or dirty equipment or dirty wards. And then there's conflict about what we should be doing, how we should do it, who's responsible. And constructive, respectful, ethical, compassionate debates about those sorts of things are essential to improving quality and to being effective. Teams are learning entities, and reflecting on what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve, how we're going about it, what we need to change is fundamental to healthy working. But it's managing that conflict in a compassionate, supportive way. It's valuing diversity in our teams, the diversity of people's professional backgrounds, their demographic backgrounds, their opinions. Diversity is the nature of our universe. It's the nature of everything. And we human beings have got to embrace diversity in all its forms to really value the complexity, the intricacy, the beauty, the interconnectedness of our world. And so valuing different opinions, valuing different perspectives, valuing different life experiences is really important for us in terms of our innovation, growth, and development. So it's managing these things in compassionate, supportive ways. And it's recognizing that, if you take the example of managing the person who manages you, it's a really good example, I think, to think about. You know, if you look at what affects people's happiness, the number one factor overall, of course, is physical and mental health. Second is relationships at home, and then relationships at work. And at work, our relationship with our leader or supervisor is twice as important to our happiness as our relationships with our colleagues, for good or for bad. So if you have a poor relationship with your supervisor, then that has a huge impact on happiness and health, mental health. So it's, when we think about managing upwards, we have to be very careful, because courage without wisdom can be really reckless. On the other hand, wisdom without courage can be associated with just not doing anything. So let me pause there. Vidyamala, I know you have words of wisdom about all of this too.
Yes, I mean, it's difficult to know what to add, because it's so wonderful what you've said. I like the way someone's put in the chat box that it's really helpful to distinguish between task conflict and interpersonal conflict. I think that's a very interesting point, because often we don't have clarity. There's just a big sort of muddle that we've got lots of conflict at work and I hate it. But of course, going back to, you know, these steps of the compassion behaviors, the first one is presence and awareness, and actually being able to know what's really going on. But I think, you know, one thing I could probably sort of elaborate on a little bit, or riff off a little bit, is the relationship between wisdom and compassion, which I think is very, very interesting, because I think, you know, you can definitely see them as two sides of a coin. And the traditional image, which I shared yesterday, is like the two wings of a bird. And a bird can only fly, obviously, if both its wings are balanced and developed. It needs to have the strength to fly. And so I think the way I would look at it is, wisdom on its own might come across as a bit cognitive, a bit aloof. So we might be very, very clear about what's needed in the workplace for ourselves or others, but there isn't the emotional warmth. There isn't the kind of connected aspect. And I'm sure probably many of us have experienced that in workplaces where there might be a high degree of clarity, but there's not enough warmth. And then compassion on its own, if it's not understood correctly in the ways that we're talking about this evening and yesterday, it can just be a bit warm and fuzzy without the clarity. So yeah, there might be a really strong emphasis on, say, relationship, but without the clarity in terms of what are we trying to do here as a team. So I think, you know, and also wisdom it's more than just awareness. It's a kind of ability to really see what's going on, see the nature of experience, keep perspective. You know, there's the kind of what's immediately in front of us, but there's also much, much bigger perspective of life itself, the mystery of existence. And actually perspective, I think, is very, very important in the workplace, because we can get so bogged down by the details in front of us. So I think that I really love this kind of dance between wisdom and clarity, and then love and emotional connection. And I think, you know, compassionate leadership at its best, or showing up at work in a compassionate way, whether you're a leader or whether you're, I think that your example of managing up is also very interesting as a worker. You know, how do you relate to your boss? And if we can have this beautiful synthesis of clarity and perspective and emotional engagement and warmth and care, we're going to get somewhere.
Thank you. And the importance of presence in all of this is fascinating. If we look at teams and conflict, that distinction between conflicts about what we should be doing, how we should be doing it, and who's responsible versus conflicts between individuals does, as a comment in the chat points out, get quite fuzzy. So what we see very often happening is within a team and in workplace, people will be having a debate about what we should be doing or how we should be doing it or who's responsible. And it becomes quite heated and spills over into interpersonal conflict. So, you know, you and I may be having a debate, Vidyamala, about, you know, what we should be doing. And it becomes quite strong, and I go home and I wake up in the night and think, oh, Vidyamala said that to me. That was really rude. So next day, you would never do that, I know. And the next day,
of course.
and the next day we're in a meeting and you make a proposition and I just come in hard and critically and actually quite aggressively disagree. So what we see often is that debates about the task can spill over into interpersonal conflicts. But when teams are mindful, in other words, when teams are present with their own processes, what we see is that's much less likely to happen. So there's something about recognizing that what we need to do is to manage conflicts about the task in a positive, transparent, respectful, mutually supportive, compassionate way, so that they don't spill over into interpersonal conflicts. And we need to deal with interpersonal conflicts early and quickly. Look, of course, we all fall out from time to time. In my family, you know, we may have a disagreement about something, it's quickly resolved and we're stronger and more loving as a consequence. But it's the chronic stuff that is so damaging. So thank you. Are there any questions or comments before we move on? And thank you for the lovely comments in the chat. Any questions or comments? So let's move on and talk about core human needs in terms of surfing and sinking at work. My perception is that in many organizations, the people who lead our organizations have forgotten that the people who work in those organizations are human beings. How could we forget? But the way that organizations are structured and run, it often ignores the reality of what the core needs of human beings are. And that's why people are becoming more and more stressed. We talked earlier about levels of stress amongst teachers, welfare, social workers, doctors, nurses. In many organizations, in many sectors, we're seeing increasing levels of staff stress. The reason is not because we're not making sufficient mindfulness apps available, lovely though mindfulness is, it's because we are not meeting the core human needs of people in the workplace. And that results in ill health and also a loss of intrinsic motivation and people quitting their organizations. So I just want to show you a slide showing what these core human needs are and how, in a way, they are they manifest in practice. So there are three core needs that we have in the workplace. Vidyamala, can you see the ABC of core needs?
I can do, but it would be helpful if you put it on full screen. So if you go down to that's the one. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So we have three core needs, and all of these, all three must be met for us to be well and for us to feel, if you like, intrinsically motivated in the workplace, engaged, wanting to do a good job. The first is we need to have a sense of autonomy or a sense of control over our work life. Not that we're just a cog in some huge system, that we're told to do that, directed to do that, and our voices aren't heard. We need to feel like we have some control. You know, another way of understanding this is one way of understanding stress at work is it's an imbalance between demands and control. So we've got very high demands and very low control. That's a toxic cocktail for stress. So the more we can have a sense of control, the more we can give people voice and influence in the workplace, the better they will be. And actually, the better our workplaces will be, because, you know, the people who work in our organizations have a huge amount of knowledge and skills and experience and motivation. And the more we give their voice, the more we hear their voices, the more we listen with fascination, the more we give them influence over decision making, the more engaged they are, the more innovative our organizations are. And innovation is, if you like, the rocket booster of productivity, of performance. What I see as the, you know, the kind of biggest deficit in most organizations is this hierarchical approach that manages top down and prevents the voices of people with the frontline skill from being heard and influencing direction and strategy. And the second is people need to be in environments of justice and fairness and transparency, rather than environments characterized by fear and blame and secrecy and favoritism. Because if you work in an environment that's full of fear and blame and secrecy and favoritism, you don't feel in control. You feel out of control. So, you know, we need to create cultures where if something goes wrong, if a mistake is made, we seek to learn from it, not to blame somebody. One of the organizations I work with has introduced what they call a restorative culture, where when something goes wrong, they seek to understand who all of the people are who've been hurt by the mistake. Maybe the people who made the mistake, maybe the service users, maybe the team, maybe the others in the organization. And they ask, who's been hurt by this? What are their needs? And who's responsible for meeting those needs? And they've eliminated 85% of staff disciplinary processes and 95% of suspensions, saving millions of pounds in the process, reducing staff stress, reducing absenteeism, reducing staff turnover. And control's also about people having control over their working conditions. You know, we want equipment that works and is safe. If we work shift work, we want to have some influence over our shifts, so that we can balance the needs of our lives outside work. I have caring responsibilities. I have young children. I need to be able to balance. I need to be able to have some influence over the shifts I do. And we see organizations that have introduced what they call self-rostering, which works brilliantly well, where people come together and they negotiate and find ways of agreeing shift patterns that are in the best interests of everybody. So it's about first meeting the need for autonomy and control. Second is the need for belonging. We need to work in teams and organizations where we feel valued and respected and supported, where our colleagues are appreciative and supportive and kind, which isn't characterized by incivility or aggression or discrimination or abuse. And actually, we know that when people work in teams that have clear goals and they meet regularly and they have a positive climate in those teams, stress levels are 50% lower. I mean, it's a huge impact. And we know that it's about working in cultures where there is compassionate, supportive leadership. As I've said, the number one factor in staff engagement is compassionate, supportive leadership. And the number one factor that predicts the performance of organizations is staff engagement, particularly influence over decision-making. And I've described one organization already, Berkshire Health, which has retrained all its staff in compassionate leadership. In Wales, the country where I grew up, the healthcare system has a 10-year strategy to develop compassionate leadership across the whole of health and social care. They're 3 years into that strategy now, making huge progress. And the third need we have is a need for a sense of contribution, or that what we do is really making a difference. And the number one factor we see that prevents that for people is chronic work overload. And I think it's a pathology of modern organizations. People are just overloaded with work. And, you know, it's work overload is the number one factor in staff stress. We know that staff stress and burnout are associated with cardiovascular disease, addictions, alcoholism, cancers, diabetes, depression, and as we've talked about, staff turnover. So we have to address this issue of overloading people with work. It's kind of like, I think it's become kind of like the pattern on the wallpaper that we no longer see. So we don't talk about work overload. And I think one of the reasons is leaders don't talk about it because they don't necessarily have solutions. But it's the number one factor in staff stress and the number one reason why people quit. So we have to find solutions. You know, one of the movements that I see around the world is the movement towards a 4-day week. So instead of people working 5 days, they work 4 days for the same amount of pay and, you know, 4/5 of their normal hours. Most of the experiments around the world show that that's associated with improved productivity and, of course, with better well-being of staff. So, you know, paradoxically, surfing rather than sinking is about doing less work, not more. And I'll come back to that issue. One of the organizations I work with regularly asks its staff, what would you reduce or get rid of in your work? And they've eliminated something like 85% of bureaucracy. They've eliminated staff having to ask lots of permission from managers all of the time. They've introduced new technologies to help staff be less overloaded. And we know that improving team working, and I'll give some basic guidance on, some guidance on the basics of how we can improve team working in a short while, that improving team working is associated with reduced workload. Contribution is also affected by the quality of management and supervision. We've talked a lot about that, compassionate supervision already. Leaders who are present, who attend, understand, empathize, and help. And people having opportunities for continuing to learn and grow in their jobs so that they feel ever more skilled, ever more competent. If you take these 8 areas I've just described, forget workload for the moment. The other 7 areas are, if you like, resources. So the more that we give people voice and influence, we create justice and fairness, give people better working conditions, improve team working, create supportive, compassionate cultures and leadership, give opportunities for learning and development. The more resources people have, the more they're able to cope with heavy work demands. So there's hope in that. Understand, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be talking about chronic work overload for people. I think that every organization, every board, every executive team, every leader should be focused on the issue of how we ensure our staff are not subject to chronic work overload, because it is such a significant factor in terms of people sinking rather than surfing. But at the same time, we get hope from the fact that by focusing on these other factors, that we can ensure that people are better able to cope with heavy workloads. So let me pause and see if you have, before we move on to asking you to reflect on this a little more, just to see if you have any questions that arise from what I've just said. Any questions that anyone has? I'll end the slideshow for a moment while I just check in on seeing if there are any questions.
As someone's just said in the chat, there is always hope, as you say.
Yeah, there's always hope.
Yeah.
Hope comes from collective action.
Yeah. There's also a lovely quote from Desmond Tutu where he said that change happens through millions of tiny acts, and that's how apartheid was overcome.
Oh, that's, yeah, amazing.
Really amazing.
Yeah.
And we can all be part of, because sometimes it can all feel too big to feel we can have any influence, but millions of tiny acts taken collectively can overcome something as entrenched as apartheid in South Africa.
And that's what Rebecca Solnit says in her book, Hope in the Dark. Collective acts, no matter how small, give us hope in the dark. So, okay, so let me ask you just to reflect for a moment on these 8 areas I've talked about in terms of this question. Considering the ABC of needs, what challenges do you face in surfing rather than sinking at work? And that can be in your current job or a previous job, and what can you do to overcome them? And just reflect on that for 3 or 4 minutes. And if you're comfortable doing so, then put your thoughts in the chat. So I'm just showing the question there. And then I'll go back to those 3 core needs, the ABC and the 8 areas, for you just to have a think about for, 3 or 4 minutes, and just pop anything in the chat that you'd like to share. And I should say as well that we'll be sharing the slides with everybody afterwards, so you'll have a copy of all of the slides. Okay, so I'll stop sharing the slides now, and just picking up some of the comments in the chat. We don't have a departmental culture where contributions are regularly shared. I'd like to implement that in a strategic manner. It feels very powerful. One of the organizations I work in, a healthcare organization, has 100 nurse councils that have 6 hours a month to meet, to reflect, review, share their thoughts about how to improve the functioning of the organization. Another top performing organization asks every team and department to take at least an hour a week to come together and reflect and review. Pacing in work is my go-to. A short meditation, movement, water, and food nourishment, kindness to myself, and being grateful that I have work. That's brilliant and wonderful. Self-compassion.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah. So Alex will let us know where to locate the recording and the slides, I hope, in the chat, Alex.
He said that he'll be emailing out the recording and slides in the coming days.
Great.
To everybody, so that's good.
In our country, legislation determines the choices that leaders are taking. Research may help legislators to modify the actual system. One of the initiatives that the Global Compassion Coalition is taking is, as I said, to focus on compassion in politics. And we also have now a conversation ongoing about creating compassionate parliaments, because often our parliamentary systems, certainly in the United Kingdom and obviously in the United States as well, have become so entrenched in hostility and rudeness and aggression that they set an appalling example to people. Particularly, I think of my grandchildren, appalling example in our country. So this is an area we have to address. It takes courage, of course. I'm self-employed in a community. Issues are work schedules, teamwork, and supervision. Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about teamwork in a moment, which in a way which I hope will be really practically helpful for you. And work schedules and coming together in a compassionate, collective way to explore and negotiate how those can be managed with compassionate ground rules, I think is really helpful. Team mindfulness, self-care, relationships, yeah, seeking safe and trusting supervision. Do you know, and for me, what's amazing is when we look at all of the research evidence, if we want to know what predicts, so for example, I mentioned earlier the staff survey in the healthcare system in England. It's the biggest, longest running staff survey anywhere in the world, annual staff survey. It's been running for 21 years. And last year I did some analysis of the all of the data, all of the analysis that other academics have done to look at what predicts the performance of healthcare organizations. Number one is staff engagement, and in particular, opportunity to influence decisions. So it's, are we giving staff voice, that issue of autonomy and control? And the key factor that determines that is compassionate leadership, supportive leadership, along with an appreciative environment, good team working, good relationships with colleagues. Second is, do we have inclusive environments where diversity, demographic diversity is valued? It's the after workload, which is a negative predictor of patient satisfaction, inclusive environments are the next most important predictor. So where all of our staff feel valued and respected and supported, patients are treated with more compassion. It's you know, it's about belonging. And then third is, I've mentioned compassionate leadership already. On its own, it's a really important predictor as well, because it helps people cope with change and challenge in their organizations when their leaders are supportive. The number one role of leaders, as I said, the most important skill of a leader is listening to those we lead, and the most important task of a leader is helping those we lead to do their jobs more effectively. And then comes burnout and workload and morale. So high workload, high burnout, high stress are hugely powerful negative predictors of performance. And then comes quality of team working. And the better the team working, the more people work in teams that have clear goals, meet regularly to review their performance, have positive, supportive relationships, the much more effective are those organizations, the far less stressed our staff, the much better is the care provided to patients. So these are the factors that predict performance, you know, and yet what we see is leaders focused on targets and key performance indicators and performance management and accountability and holding people to account. It doesn't work. The evidence tells us that, you know, compassionate leadership, supportive colleagues, good team working, these are the things that make a difference to performance. Working in a hospital department that's been merged to save money has removed the team safety that we had. Previous manager was very controlling, but not good at dealing with the emotional parts of staff engagement. And we don't get to meet as individuals or in groups. And I'm working on finding my compassionate colleagues to start making small changes with. I think that's wonderful, working on finding my compassionate colleagues to start making small changes. As we've emphasized, haven't we, continually? Collective action by small groups working together, that's what makes a difference. Yeah. People can be promoted beyond their actual capabilities, ego and insecurities, can play a part in divisions. Yeah. You know, and I think when people are promoted beyond their capabilities and put in leadership positions, they end up, because they lack confidence, they end up being more controlling and directive rather than more compassionate and supportive. There's a disconnect between the values and actions in the workplace from management, as you said earlier. It's only if it's measured and commanded we'll get it done. Yeah, we need to, I think every leader should be seeking feedback on at least an annual basis from those they lead in order to improve. Leadership is an ongoing journey. Expectations that workers consistently work hours of overtime daily with no compensation or support. No other jobs available in the field at the moment. So we see that one of the key predictors of burnout and staff stress is staff working beyond their contracted hours, whether paid or unpaid, is really damaging to staff stress and health and well-being. And ultimately that damages the performance of organizations because staff leave or they're not so effective or they make mistakes or they're exhausted. The Global Compassion Coalition is committed to creating more compassionate, supportive workplaces, and Vidyamala and I are working within the healthcare impact cluster, as we said, to bring about the change that desperately needed. And I think it is about repeating and repeating and repeating these messages that we need to get across in our teams and organizations. So thank you for those comments. We have two more topics that we really want to talk with you about. One is team working, and the other, the most important topic of all, is self-compassion. But I think it might be good if we take a 5-minute screen break to take care of ourselves and to do a bit of stretching. But let's just take a 5-minute screen break and come back together at, let's say 25 minutes past the hour. Thank you. So lovely to see you all back. I can see Matanda. Hi, Matanda. I can see Kay and Janice. Hi, Janice and Maria and Pablo. Vidyamala, lovely to see you all back. So I've talked a lot about team working. Vidyamala has teams in breathworks. And team working is so important to us human beings. You know, if you look over the last couple of 100,000 years, you see from the earliest human history, we worked in teams. So we've got evidence from archaeological studies of humans, high M, of humans herding horses into a canyon, wild horses into a canyon, so that they could capture them, slaughter them, kill them for food. We've got so much archaeological evidence of how early humans used complex team working to achieve their tasks. And we've continued to work in teams, and it's enabled us to discover most of the structure of the human genome. It's enabled us to explore the outer reaches of our solar system. It's how we work in teams. You know, in my career, I think the highlights, the times when I've really surfed the biggest waves in the most exciting and exhilarating way, have been when I've been working in really amazing teams, multidisciplinary teams. I remember one really big study we did of cultures of quality and safety in healthcare. It was a huge study, something in the region of nearly $2 million of funding went into it. And we had people from a huge variety of professional, academic, different backgrounds, patients, representatives, sociologists, political scientists, psychologists, statisticians, sociologists, people from a diverse range of countries. Most of my research work over my career has been with people from many different countries, many different ethnic, religious, cultural backgrounds. And those have been the richest experiences by far from me, working in teams that are highly diverse, with a clear set of goals, with supportive personal relationships, and where we come together regularly to meet, to reflect, to review. So team working is really, getting team working right is key to surfing, not sinking at work. And what I see in many organizations is poorly developed team working. And I've been studying teams since the 1980s. We've looked at thousands and thousands of teams, and we're able to distill out what are the key factors that ensure that teams are effective. And I want to show you what these factors are and how practically you can use this in ensuring that your teams are surfing rather than sinking. So what we see from all these teams is that we need to get these dimensions right: clear team identity, clear agreed goals, clarity about our roles in the team, supportive relationships we've talked about, including people in the important decisions. We've talked about effective communication and decision making about the task, about who's responsible for the task, about how to do it, constructive debate, valuing diversity, a commitment to improving continually. I always say, if the best barometer of a team's functioning is it developing new and improved ways of doing things? Is it innovating? Because when we bring people together with diverse experience and backgrounds, if the team is working well, those teams will be fountains of innovation. And it's working effectively with other teams and departments in our organizations. So there's a set of questions here on the right-hand side. Is everyone clear about the inspiring purpose and about who are the members of the team? If you sit down with your team, let's say every 6 months, and the team as a whole goes through these questions together, all of the experience we have and the evidence we have tell us your team will improve on virtually every dimension of performance. So just sitting and discussing these questions together will ensure that teams continue to improve how they work as teams. So are we clear about our inspiring purpose? Have we agreed 5 or 6 clear, challenging goals? Not 56, 5 or 6. Clear, not vague. Agreed rather than had imposed. And challenging, not unambitious, because that's the whole point of goal setting, is to help us strive to be better. Are people clear about their roles? Are relationships compassionate and supportive? Absence of chronic interpersonal conflict? Do we involve everybody in the discussions? Because that's the way we get good decision making. You know, I discovered leading when I led a business school and I had a management team. I discovered the paradoxical truth that was that if you got everybody to offer their opinion, you made decisions much more quickly. We made better decisions more quickly when people had the opportunity to contribute decisions than when leaders just impose decisions. And have we got positive team meetings? Do you know? People sit in meetings after meetings. We've got lots of videotapes that we've made of meetings in different organizations. And you see people sat in these meetings with their heads bowed, looking at the floor or looking at the desk in front of them. And you can kind of see a speech bubble coming out of their head. I do hope death comes soon. People sit in meeting after meeting after meeting, just so boring. It's just so hard. It's just turgid. It's just horrid. So much time spent in these meetings. They should be engaging and fun. By and large, when we bring people together to have discussions about, important issues, we should make them engaging and fun, at least at the end of every meeting, review it. Did we all need to be here? Did we need to have this meeting? Did it need to be this long? How could we improve it? How can we make it effective? I think Google only allows meetings to be half an hour. Some other places have stand-up meetings. A lot of the meetings I think Vidyamala and I are involved in, we begin with a meditation and we often end with a meditation. And it's ensuring that we have the kind of constructive debate that I talked about earlier, and we value all of the diverse contributions and the experiences and knowledge and the skills of the people in our team. And one of the goals of every team in organizations should be improving the effectiveness with which we work with other teams and departments. So part of being compassionate is asking other teams that we need to work with, how well do we work with you? How can we improve? How can we be more cooperative? How can we be more timely? So it's attending, understanding, and empathizing and helping the other teams and departments we work with. And great team working is recognizing that everybody in the team is responsible for developing compassionate team working. We're all responsible for the compassion in our teams, noticing suffering at work and inquiring, being curious about why there are missed deadlines or why there's conflict. What's that to do with? Is it because we've just got so much chronic work overload? Or have we neglected to agree what our goals are as a team? Or are we failing to meet regularly enough? Most of the difficulties I see in teams are because of a lack of clear team goals. They don't meet regularly enough, or people aren't clear about their roles, or there's work overload. Those are the main causes of the failure of good teams. Of course, incivility and rudeness and aggression and discrimination are incredibly destructive. And it's cultivating the assumption that everyone's like me. Everyone simply wants to be happy in life. We all want to be happy. And our happiness is fundamentally dependent on the happiness of those around us. And it's being present. We've talked a lot about presence today. Being present and calm and steady in the face of suffering. Listening empathically. And recognizing that compassion doesn't mean necessarily jumping in to solve problems. We want to help, but it's being present and calm and listening empathically. And it's having the courage as teams to challenge policies in our organizations which are oriented to blame, and where there are lots of legalistic approaches that deny the reality of our human connection. And it's having the courage to address corrosive politics, favoritism, unfairness, discrimination, toxic behaviors, the courageous, wise compassion that we talked about earlier. And the final thing I want to say about team working is, I mentioned at the beginning that meditation is central to my life. And when I started studying teams in organizations back in the 1980s, pretty quickly I saw teams under just huge pressure, work overload. And I asked myself this question: what happens if we could get teams to meditate? It's kind of a metaphorical question. So that our research began to address the question, what happens if teams get off the hamster wheel rather than just spinning? What happens if they take time out on a regular basis to reflect, to review? What are we trying to achieve? How are we going about it? What do we need to change? We've looked at this question in manufacturing organizations, in oil and gas industry, in healthcare organizations with executive teams, C-suite teams, boards, breast cancer care teams, community mental health teams, primary healthcare teams. And all our research and many others around the world shows that teams that stop and take time out on a regular basis for debriefs and after action reviews are much more innovative. On average, they're between 35 and 40% more productive than teams that don't take time out. So stopping work to reflect, what are we trying to achieve? How are we going about it? What do we need to change? Is associated with much higher levels of productivity. It's, for example, a ward shift in a hospital taking 15 minutes at the start of a shift to prepare, 15 minutes at the end of a shift to review, accident and emergency departments taking an hour at the end of the week to review. All of the evidence we have is those teams are dramatically more productive and effective. So I think all of what we've been talking about today is creating psychological safety in teams and organizations. And that's just an aid memoir of some of the key themes we've talked about today. Before we move to our final and most important topic, I just want to check again whether you have, and let me emphasize again, you'll all have copies of the slides. I just want to take the time again just to check with you any questions from what I've just said about team working thus far. If you do, please raise your hand or put the question in the chat box. There's a lovely comment there in the chat box. I often wonder what people think meditation really is. I think meditation is simply being. Simply being. So any questions about team working? It's a lot that I've shared with you. Vidyamala, did you want to add anything to what I've said?
Well, I'm just sitting here feeling such deep appreciation for the depth of your knowledge and your insights and these decades of being really, I mean, it's also very, very moving that you spent all these years researching it, obviously very diligently and intelligently and publishing and talking to others and so on. But it's so that people can, have better lives. As you were saying, we spend so much of our lives at work, and that you've been so dedicated to trying to make that a better experience for people. And also, obviously, it's going to lead to better outcomes for the world. But I'm just sitting here fascinated.
Thank you. Well,
and you've got it all at your fingertips. I'm always so impressed when people can cite studies and so on, just like that.
It's been a privilege for me. It's been a privilege as me. What's your view on having scheduled one-to-one meetings versus ad hoc when able to meetings between supervisor and worker, because the supervisor is always busy? Well, you know, again, all of the evidence we have is it's really important to have those regular meetings with time set aside. You know, if we just say, well, it's when I'm not busy or we get around to it, then it's neglected. But the evidence we have is that the ABC of core needs are much better met when there's regular one-to-one supervision meetings, and that's the most important task of a leader, is to support those they lead. And I notice Pippa has to go, but thank you, Pippa, for being with us, and hopefully you'll catch the last bit when you get the recording. So thank you for your lovely comments in the chat. Meditation, being aware of being aware. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. Let's move on to talk about self-compassion now. And yeah, I guess it's just to say, I'd like to introduce this before I hand over to Vidyamala. It's just to say, we understand more and more now that our ability to be compassionate to others is dependent on the quality of the relationship that we have with ourselves, the extent to which we're present with ourselves. The extent to which we accept or allow when we're feeling pain, rather than deny it or turn away from it or repress it. And then we can inquire into it, to explore it with curiosity, and then to bring a nurturing, caring attitude towards ourselves. After all, each of us is as deserving of love as every other human being on the planet. Tara Brach talks about rain, recognizing when we feel pain, accepting the feelings rather than rejecting them, inquiring into them with caring curiosity and caring deeply for ourselves. And this is, I think, at the basis of our ability to live full, compassionate lives full of wonder and gratitude, is nurturing our capacity to be self-compassionate. Vidyamala.
Good, thank you so much, Michael. So I think this is a lovely note to end on. And, you know, it's been 3 hours, it's quite intense, isn't it, for those of us on the call? Very, very rich, really wonderful input from Michael. And of course, just your presence, Michael, is so inspiring. And I mentioned at the beginning the 50-50 principle, you know, 50% inside and 50% engaging. So I guess the self-compassion is, what do we do? How, that 50% we've got inside, well, what's the quality of that attention when we're, you know, turning towards our own experience, staying engaged? It can be, you know, harsh, it can be judgmental, it can be dismissive. There's so many ways we can respond to ourselves in an unkind way, an uncompassionate way. And it's a really wonderful training that if we can train so that we can naturally be tender towards ourselves and to treat ourselves the way we would try to treat a loved one, having whatever our experience is, because it's natural to care, as we've been saying. Compassion is innate. And I think it can be helpful sometimes to come towards self-compassion through remembering what it's like to care for somebody that we love who's hurting or who's got any kind of difficulty. And we're going to do a little practice now to conclude the session. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to involve the breath. So we'll come into the body, we'll come into the breath. And then we'll imagine that every in-breath and every out-breath is saturating our being in kindliness. You might feel it, or it might be more imagined. Even imagining it, having that intention, will have an effect. So we'll imagine that we've got this gentle kind of quality of being bathed and saturated in this intention of care, of tenderness, of kindness. And the metaphor that I used yesterday in the session when we were looking at how do we deal with our own pain, illness and these kind of things, is if we remember what it's like to be on a summer's day when there's a gentle, warm breeze, and it's just lovely. It's just sort of, we just love the feeling of this breeze on the skin. When it's not too hot, not too cold, just the right temperature. The wind isn't strong, it's just a gentle breeze. And that breeze has got warmed by the heat of the sun. So metaphorically, it's a bit like this intention of love in our hearts is a bit like a sun within us, and our breath is warmed by this intention of kindliness and care. And that when we're meeting our experience directly, which is what we're doing, if we notice that it's all getting a bit much, we can broaden our awareness. And if we notice we're a bit held back, we just come closer, closer, closer. But we do this through the body. The body is where all experience takes place. And you might immediately think, well, no, it isn't, because I got my head. The head is part of the body. It goes back to Descartes in the West, seeing the mind and the body, or the head and the body is separate, but the head is a limb of the body, just like the arms and the legs are limbs of the body. So if we can see our whole experience in a much more holistic way. Okay, so let's allow our weight to rest down into the chair, our feet into the floor. And seeing if we can let the body be held by the chair beneath us, or the bed, or the floor, whatever it is that we're resting upon. The letting go of the burden of gripping onto ourselves and allowing ourselves to be held. Letting the hands rest in the lap, letting the face be soft, letting the buttocks be soft. And tuning into our experience right now, physically, mentally, emotionally. Allowing it into awareness. Might be aspects that are painful, aspects that are happy. But what we often do with anything uncomfortable is we resist it, we shut down around it, we contract against it, which causes all sorts of extra tensions. So making sure that we're not shutting anything out, fully present, or as fully present as we can be. And allowing breathing to drop deep in the body, and allowing our awareness to rest inside breathing, inside the body. Gently, tenderly. Receiving experience on the in-breath and letting go of experience on the out-breath. Imagine on the in-breath, this kindness and tenderness, a deep compassionate acceptance pouring into the body, heart, mind. And on the out-breath, it pours into the body, heart, mind. It's like on the in-breath we receive it, on the out-breath it saturates and drenches the body, heart, mind. So we're resting in this field of tenderness, field of compassionate acceptance, kindliness, care within us. What would it be like to be able to drop into this felt quality during your working day? Just taking little pauses, letting go of contraction, letting go of resistance, being present with kindliness. Now let's open our awareness, our hearts, to include everyone else here on this call. Heroic beings wanting to bring about compassionate change in the workplace. And feeling that sense of shared endeavor and connection. We're not alone. We're ready, beginning to bring the practice to a close. Maybe moving the body a little bit, however we want to, opening the eyes. Seeing if we can stay in this flow of compassion, kindness. Opening the eyes. As we were saying, Michael's been saying, compassion's one of the characteristics of compassion is not only a sensitivity to our experience and the suffering in our experience, the suffering aspect of our experience and the experience of others, but also this sense of there's something we can do, this action to alleviate that. So doing a little practice like that, where we're learning how to get out of really tight contracted states and just rest and breathe, that's got that element of, oh yes, I can change my response to my experience, and that will activate these reward systems in the brain. Good. So back to you, Michael.
Thank you. Yeah. Being present with ourselves and with each other is the basis of human connection. And I think our challenge as a species now is to re-establish connection with ourselves in order that we can re-establish connection with each other in all our myriad diversity, beauty, wonderfulness, originality, uniqueness, and to connect with presence with everything around us, with the biodiversity, with all of the other species, with the beauty of our planet, with the beauty of the trees, the flowers, the insects, the vegetation, the mysterious beauty of our universe. Our challenge as a species is interconnection. We focus today very much on the workplace, and you know, I talked about the archaeological evidence. You know, we think a couple of 100,000 years ago, our forebears, our ancestors, they'd get up in the morning, they'd wake up, they'd eat what was left over from yesterday. They'd go out, do some gathering, find some food. A couple of hours, they'd come back together, share the food. So they'd work for about 2 or 3 hours, and then they'd play with the children, sit around telling stories about the firmament up there and the mystery of their existence. It was pretty cool, you know? It was pretty cool. What have we done to ourselves? For goodness sake. So, as Vidyamala said, I think our shared sacred mission here is to collectively work to create lives that are wonderful, fulfilling, full of gratitude. Of course, difficulty comes along, and we have to deal with that. But so much of our pain is self-imposed from the kind of environments, organizations, ways of working that we've created, and we have the knowledge to do it differently. I want to say a huge thank you to you. I feel really deeply personally connected with each of you participating in this today. There are lots of practical resources in the book that I wrote during the worst of the pandemic, called Compassionate Leadership. It focuses on health and social care, but the practical lessons, I think, apply in any organization, and it's full, I hope, of practical resources that are open source, so they're not copyrighted or anything like that. That's all available. And there are lots of practical resources on the Global Compassion Coalition website to help you, and more are being added every week by this amazing team, Alex and Matt Hawkins and Rachel Eubanks Gold and so many others, led by Rick Hansen and the wonderful board and advisory council, and our healthcare impact cluster that Vidyamala and I work together on to promote more nurturing healthcare communities. And Vidyamala's website, Breathworks Mindfulness and Compassion Training. If you click on that link there, that'll take you straight to...
We can't see any of the slides at the moment,
Oh,
Michael.
no.
I wondered if you were talking us through some slides, but I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Should have put this at least 30 seconds earlier.
I'm being all too human again. There we
wonderful.
go. There we go. So there's the book I mentioned.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is excellent. I have a copy here, so I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you. That's you and my mother now that recommend it. So. My 97-year-old mother. Yeah, she says it helps her sleep. But it is, I hope, full of lots of practical resources that will be helpful for you. And the Global Compassion Coalition website is there. Lots of resources. And then Vidyamala's website, Breathworks Mindfulness and Compassion. If you click
that, can I just, that's actually not the right
link. Oh,
no,
okay.
but luckily Matt's put it in the chat box. So it's
great.
mindfulness.org.uk. Yeah.
Great. And there's my email if you want to follow up on anything that we've covered in this time together today. So yeah, first of all, my huge thanks to you all for joining us. It's been a delight to be with you. Thank you. Enormous thanks to my dear colleague Vidyamala and thanks to Alex and to the Global Compassion Coalition. So thank you all very much.
Huge thanks to you, Michael, for sharing your wealth of knowledge and understanding and commitment. It's deep commitment that you just exude to make the world a better place. And then you do the kind of very broad, make the world a better place, and you exude how life is wonderful and mysterious, and then you also drill down to the detail, really, really practical detail. So that's quite remarkable that you can do that. Good. So look, it's 1 minute past, but why don't we just have a moment or two where, if you want to, just put in the chat box a word that sums up what you're taking away from the workshop, and then I'll read those out. I love doing this at the end of Zoom calls, and it's like a kind of poem, you know, and it's also very quick, which is handy when we slightly run over. But gratitude, hopeful, heartfelt, compassion, revolution, touching, inspiring, heart connections, inspiring, hopeful. Compassion to others starts with compassion to myself. Yes. Possibilities. Energy. Change is possible. 3 exclamation marks. Very good. We are others. Good. Well, maybe we'll leave it there. I don't know if there's any more going to come in, but we've run over slightly and don't want to take your time. So that's beautiful, wonderful, those words. Yeah. Good. So go well, everybody. And yeah, do really follow up Michael's work and the Global Compassion Coalition. And thank you so much, Matt, there in the background, making it all very, very smooth. And if you want to unmute yourselves to say goodbye, that's a very nice thing to do at the end of a Zoom call.
It's a pleasure,
Bye
everyone.
bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goodbye. Have a good time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Em. Thank
Boys.
you, Em. Hi, guys.
Thank you forever.
Very nice, both of you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Pablo.
for everything.
Bye, Pablo.
Thank you, Pablo.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
Leah.
Bye, Jamal. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, bye, Leah. Bye, Margaret.
Bye-bye. Bye, Margaret.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye, Vidyamala.
Bye, Margaret. Lovely to see you.
Matananda. Goodbye, Matananda.
Bye. Good.
Thank you, Margaret. Yeah.